Greetings, friends. Prepare for another thrilling journey as we delve into Reddit's most bizarre tales. We're plunging deep into the quirkiest corners of the web. Grab your popcorn and join us on this adventure. Remember to hit subscribe and like. Let's begin. My first wife, Amy, and I met in college about 30 years ago, back when life wasn't dominated by cell phones. From the moment we laid eyes on each other, we knew it was love. We got married right after graduation, and the first 2 years were blissful. We both had steady jobs, earning about the same, and things were looking up for us financially. But then something changed. About 2 years into our marriage, I started feeling constantly fatigued. Not just a little tired, but utterly exhausted, day in and day out. My sleep was a mess, and our intimacy took a nosedive. I had no energy left for anything, including alone time with Amy. As the months passed, I started gaining weight, even though I wasn't eating any more than usual. Amy grew concerned and urged me to see a doctor. I resisted at first, but her persistence paid off, and I finally made the call. Unfortunately, my doctor was on a month-long vacation, so I had to wait over 3 months for an appointment. In the meantime, things between Amy and me grew tense. The less time we spent together, the more frustrated she became. Our arguments became more frequent, though I barely had the energy to engage. Whatever little strength I had, I saved for work. I couldn't afford to lose my job. A week before my doctor's appointment, my employer handed me some forms to take to the doctor, suggesting I go on leave. I didn't want to, but I understood that my performance had dropped, and they were concerned. Finally, the day of the appointment arrived, and Amy was relieved. I told the doctor everything, and he diagnosed me with chronic fatigue. He ordered a sleep study to be sure and prescribed sleeping pills in the meantime. I didn't know how long I'd be on leave, but I hoped the sleep study would provide some answers. When I told Amy what the doctor had said, all she could muster was, "I hope the sleeping pills work." But they didn't. I was still waking up every hour, utterly drained. Amy's frustration grew, and our arguments became more heated. She wanted intimacy, but I simply couldn't deliver. We were stuck in a waiting game, hoping the sleep clinic would call with some answers. Then, one evening, Amy came home much later than usual. She seemed unusually calm, almost content. I wondered what had happened, but I was too exhausted to ask. I was just relieved there was no fighting that night. But then it started happening more frequently. Amy coming home late, looking relaxed and unworried. That's when my suspicions began to rise. One day, I decided to follow her after work. I watched as she left the office with a male coworker and followed them to his place. I was shattered. We had taken vows to be faithful, to stand by each other in sickness and in health. But here she was, breaking those vows. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. The divorce was straightforward since we earned the same income and lived in a rented apartment. We'd split everything evenly, and I'd continue paying my share of the rent for the next 5 months. I moved into the spare bedroom but stayed in the apartment. I wanted to be there when the sleep clinic finally called. Once I had the divorce papers, I confronted Amy. She lost it, insisting she didn't want a divorce. She claimed this other guy was just a temporary distraction until my health improved. But that was unacceptable to me. I told her that if the roles were reversed, if she had a health issue that affected our intimacy, I would have waited. But her betrayal was something I couldn't forgive. She fought the divorce with everything she had, but my decision was final. I had already mapped out my escape plan. Once the lease on our apartment was up, I'd move back in with my parents. About a month before that move, the sleep clinic finally called. I had to wait another 4 months for the appointment, but at least there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. During those months with my parents, I became a recluse. The weight of Amy's betrayal crushed me, and the relentless fatigue left me too drained to face the world. When the day of the sleep study arrived, I felt like a character from a sci-fi movie strapped into all those wires and monitors. Despite the discomfort, I managed to sleep just enough for them to get the data they needed. The doctor's diagnosis was both a relief and a revelation: sleep apnea. A CPAP machine was prescribed, and as I began using it, my energy surged back. I felt like I was reclaiming my life. Back at work, my boss immediately noticed the difference. My performance had bounced back, and so had I. I started going out with friends again, but there was still a void. Something was missing. Then one morning I spotted Bianca during a run. She was breathtaking. I couldn't resist the urge to introduce myself, and we hit it off immediately. Our connection blossomed, and eventually, we got married. It's been over 20 years now, and I can't imagine life without her. A few years ago, Bianca was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was a terrifying time, but we caught it early, and she fought through it with incredible strength. The treatment process put a strain on our intimacy, but once she was declared cancer-free, we slowly found our way back to each other. After my divorce from Amy, I decided to cut all ties with her. But a few years later, we ran into each other at the mall. She was visibly shocked by how much I'd changed, how healthy and energetic I looked. When I told her about the sleep apnea, she genuinely apologized for everything she had put me through. I accepted her apology. Then she did something unexpected. She asked if we could get back together. I gently told her I was already seeing someone, and it was serious. I was, in fact, considering proposing to Bianca. There was no chance I'd ever return to Amy. In my eyes, she wasn't a bad person. Just someone who made a selfish choice that destroyed our relationship. Once a cheater, always a cheater, or so I believe. Curious, I asked why she was still single. Amy admitted that her reputation as a cheater had made it hard to find anyone willing to take a chance on her. She was even thinking about relocating to start fresh. I wished her well and walked away, never seeing her again. Initially, I thought about getting revenge on Amy and her co-worker. But the more I considered it, the more I realized that the best revenge was simply living a happy life. With Bianca by my side for over 2 decades, I'm living proof that happiness is the sweetest revenge. Not long ago, a friend of mine, David, confided in me that his wife had cheated on him. He wanted my advice since I'd been through a similar experience. I told him the decision to stay or leave was monumental and deeply personal. I advised him to put his own happiness first and not to dwell on revenge. David chose to stay, but under strict conditions. His wife had to sever all ties with the person who led her astray and confessed her infidelity to her parents and their children. She complied because she realized she loved David and wanted to make amends. Years later, David told me that if they hadn't had kids, he might not have stayed. But now with their children grown and out of the house, their marriage has endured. Every now and then, David still talks about his wife's affair. He's never forgotten it, and I admire his ability to rebuild trust. I don't know if I could have done the same. It reminds me that everyone's different. Some can forgive, while others, like me, find it impossible to stay with someone who has betrayed them. Recently, I've reflected on the people I know who have cheated. It's a mixed bag of men and women, but the common thread is a lack of integrity. I've distanced myself from those people. Even with David, our friendship has evolved. We mostly get together for the occasional card game with the guys. In my opinion, cheating is a sign of weakness or selfishness. I've had opportunities to stray from Bianca, but whenever I'm tempted, I remember the deep hurt I felt. I could never inflict that kind of pain on her. Bianca offers me a lifetime of happiness, while a fleeting moment with someone else could only bring a night of regret. So my advice is simple: don't cheat. If you're tempted, ask yourself why you're in a relationship in the first place. And if you've been cheated on, don't waste your time on revenge. Living your best life is the ultimate payback.